To save your time, my friends, here is a little summary you're going to see from this video. Russians sent two whole new brigades to Encircle Avdiivka and they are striking Stepove. They actually reached the settlement but were pushed back. Ukraine is facing a manpower shortage. We'll go into that. And finally, we'll analyze Ukrainian cluster munition tactics, which we haven't talked about before. They're pretty effective and interesting. But first of all, let's go to Avdiivka, of course. And north of Avdiivka there is Krasnogorivka and the Ukrainian-controlled settlement Stepove, which Russians are doing everything right now to occupy. Now I'll go to another photo where I show you Russian troop movements. This, my friends, right here is the 47th Mechanized Brigade, which is one of the best Ukrainian equipped brigades. They have the Western Bradleys, they also have the Leopard tanks, and they are defending Stepove right here along with other units. Now Russians just sent two whole new brigades to the north of Avdiivka, which we call this area near Krasnogorivka, and they're pushing in this direction. The goal, of course, is to link up with the Russian contingent in Vodiane, which is right here south from Avdiivka, to link up and encircle the settlement and strong point of Avdiivka. And Ukrainians do have one of their elite forces in this settlement, so this encirclement would be catastrophic for Ukraine, absolutely devastating. So naturally, Ukrainians are doing everything they can to push the Russians back. Now this line right here is a railway line and it goes through Avdiivka, and the main strong point, strong line against the Russians has been this railway because it's like a small bump or a small hill that divides these fields, and it's a little bit easier to defend than just regular plain fields. It doesn't show on this map, but Russians today actually with their two new brigades penetrated into the urbanized area of Stepove, but Ukrainians counterattacked and pushed them back again. But the Ukrainians were not able to push the Russians all the way back across the railway line, so right now the new Russian occupied areas look something like this across the railway line right here. They have what we can call a bridgehead over it, or a foothold which they can expand on. Now, while the Ukrainians were pushing the Russians out of Stepove, because if the Russians would gain a foothold in this settlement, it would be extremely poor situation for the Ukrainians, because from Stepove you can already establish firing sectors over some logistical roads. Leaving out of Avdiivka means it's like Bakhmut, where the logistics flow is going to stop when Russians can establish firing sectors over them. But the 47th Brigade, which is right here defending, sent their Western armored vehicles, we're talking Bradleys, into Stepove, and let's watch a screenshot from the footage. This here is a Ukrainian Bradley, and I chose this footage because, you know, you cannot really show much on YouTube, but I want you to see as much as possible, so I think this is fine for YouTube gods. This is Stepove. Bradley was moving full throttle, extremely fast on this road. All the time he was moving, laying down, covering fire to this building, to this building, to this building. Full throttle, full send with its main cannon. And you can see the muzzle flash here, it's like doof, 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 going like that. Just before this Bradley was driving here, we could see Russian troops running in these areas. And this is Ukrainian artillery fire wreaking havoc on these Russian troops. Now, the fate of this Bradley, unfortunately, is sad because it was knocked out cold by the Russians. The Russians scored a direct hit on it, eliminating the Bradley, but Bradley is Western design, so it saved the crew. The crew disembarked and pulled back. They survived. The Bradley, however, didn't. Now, what are the Russian tactics north of Avdiivka and those whole new two brigades? Well, we have information that Russians are now changing their tactics a bit. 2-3 weeks ago, they used these massive armored columns, convoys that were shot to pieces by Ukrainians. Now Russians are mostly going back to what they used in Bakhmut, 15 men-sized groups, offensive groups who are sent, mostly infantry. They don't have much equipment, but Russia has a lot of these groups, so they focus on infantry assaults. Also, unfortunately, the aspect that Ukrainians now cannot use for their advantage is their artillery effectiveness, because if you have many 15-men groups scattered across the northern Avdiivka battlefield, you cannot concentrate your artillery fire like you could on Russian armored convoys. So this unfortunately dissipates Ukrainian artillery effectiveness while using up Ukrainian artillery ammunition and small arms ammunition. And as you can see, this here is the railroad, and Russians have a small foothold over it, pushing into Stepove. Now, my friends, here is Bakhmut, where Russians also have renewed their offensives on north and south. When in Avdiivka we have the elite 47th Mechanized Brigade, in Bakhmut we have the 80th Air Assault Brigade. Let's look at their location on the map. This here, deployed south of Bakhmut behind Klishivka, is the Ukrainian 80th Air Assault Brigade, and their medical unit, we just got a report, is doing insanely dangerous suicidal medical evacuations from the front line south of Bakhmut. Ukrainian medical crews have been reporting that it's becoming increasingly difficult to get the wounded out of the battlefield. Because if you get the wounded out at the right amount of time, they will survive, and if you don't, they will transform into KIAs. It's quite robust and simple. The issue is that the medical stabilization points have been pushed back now 4 kilometers from the front. They have been pushed far away, which means between stabilization points and front line, not many vehicles are moving back and forth. So it's quite common for the 80th Air Assault Brigade medical teams to have to evacuate wounded by foot. Sometimes we're talking 4 kilometers by foot under what might be Russian kamikaze drones and artillery fire. 4 kilometers takes a lot of time. You need a lot of guys to carry one guy for 4 kilometers. Sometimes you're not gonna make it. When night comes, you have to take a break. This is all time when bleeding out is happening. So the medical reports from the 80th are not very rosy. The situation is incredibly tense for the Ukrainian forces south of Bakhmut, but they are holding right now. Now I'll zoom into the Kherson front and to the settlement of Krynky, because we have new reports from the area and new footage. And Russians have sent new reserves into the area to push back the Ukrainian footholds in the settlement. And also they have renewed their usage of glide bombs. Glide bombs are a Russian absolute terror weapon that unfortunately Ukrainians don't have any antidote for. You cannot do anything against it. On this footage, you can see the settlement of Krynky, and as you can see, it has been demolished to the ground fully. There's only foundations of buildings left, so not many places for Ukrainians or Russians to hide in. And this here is an explosion of Russian glide bombs. These bombs are huge. They can be Fab 500s with the guidance kit, because glide bombs are nothing more than old dumb Soviet plane bombs with Russian-built guidance kits like JDAMs, but Russian-built. They're not very precise, but unfortunately the explosion is big enough that if it misses even by 50 meters, the explosion still heavily damages everything around it. They are more like an area weapon since the explosion is so big. Ukrainians are afraid of these Russian glide bombs since there is nothing you can do about them, and you would need a very heavy and reinforced bunker to withstand that blast, which Ukrainians don't have in Krynky. So unfortunately the glide bombs do wreak havoc on Ukrainian troops in Krynky. Now, if we look at the urbanized area of Krynky and we go southwest from it, we see this forested area, and this is the road M14, which everybody is talking about. It's one of the main logistical supply roads leading to the western side, Kosaczki-Lagieri, Oleshki, and you can see it on this footage. This very footage right now is from this forested area. Ukrainians are making raids and offensive operations, local offensive operations into this forested area to push back what we see 70th Motorized Rifle Regiment of Russia and 26th Motorized Rifle Regiment, to push them back and to establish Ukrainian firing sectors onto this road, cutting this logistical supply line for the Russians. What is insane about this footage is actually the geolocation done on it, and it's one of the best geolocations I've ever seen. Let's look at it. As you can see, this is the ending of the footage, and we can see a small glimpse of these trees right here. And if I would see it, I wouldn't have any ideas where it might be, but somebody has done the geolocation and connected these trees to the Krynky urbanized area and a little bit to the south of it. How the hell are you identifying trees from a satellite image and connect them to the trees from GoPro? Like, this is out of this world geolocation. Whoever made it, well done. And boom, that is the area. That is Krynky right here, and the Ukrainian held foothold. And that's the area, and this is where Ukrainian forces are pushing south to occupy firing sectors against the M14 supply road. Russian Telegram channel 2 Majors writes a very short summary about the situation in Krynky, and I'll read it to you and you can enjoy footage of the very same location while I do it. The situation in the area near the settlement of Krynky remains tense. The enemy is concentrating heavy equipment on its bank. Electronic warfare continues to cover the positions, and also at night the SDF and the GUR groups are actively working with 120mm mortars. Since the beginning of the month, we have been waiting for a meeting with the commander of the Dnipro group to discuss the pressing problems, including the communication and supply issues. So far, the meeting has been postponed. So Russians have some kind of a command structure issue that the higher commanders perhaps are not aware of the situation or are not interested in meeting with the lower officers, and thus we have such reports. Now, my friends, I'll show you this, the river of Dnipro. When we zoom in even more, we see there's a river of Krynky right before Krynky. Ukrainians are transporting their troops across both of these rivers, and actually now even self-propelled howitzers and armored vehicles. I've seen it in footage, and actually it's in my yesterday's video. But today there is another whole different video. Look at this footage. One squad is already waiting on the shore, seeing a boat coming in, and which is filled with another squad. It's a rubber boat, floatable, and you can see Ukrainians are heavily using the weather conditions since the Dnipro River is producing a lot of fog at night. It's basically like a smoke screen. Russians cannot hit anything they cannot see, so when the fog is there, Ukrainians are moving logistics back and forth. And when we look at the other footage filmed from the boat, we can actually see that one of the guys actually has a night vision mounted to the helmet, which I'm glad to see that per one squad there is one night vision. That is great. Even one night vision per 9 guys gives the entire squad more situational awareness at night, which is vital for everything and anything on the battlefield. Also, another thing, look at this. Trash bags around the ankles and knees, fixed with a tape to keep them dry. I mean, it's rain season. Whatever you can keep dry, you will feel better. You will feel better, motivated and happier. Hey, if it works, it ain't stupid. I love seeing such improvisational solutions to issues. Keep it going, Ukrainian guys. I never did this in the army since I had overboots, which do the same purpose, but if I didn't have overboots, I would also use trash bags. Now, my friends, what we talked at the beginning of video, Russian offensive operations from north of Avdiivka and south and north of Bakhmut, they do reflect in the Russian losses of the past 24 hours, 14th of November 2023. 920 Russian personnel knocked out cold. This number can only be as high when you are the attacking side, because you wouldn't lose so many men if you would be defending. We have 8 tanks and several armored personnel vehicles, which again points to what I was talking about before, that the new 2 Russian brigades sent to north of Avdiivka are mostly infantry. 20 artillery systems, 24 vehicles and fuel tanks, and 15 UAVs. Now, my friends, I'll zoom into the area of Kakhovka and actually the city or village of Malokakhovka. I think it's Little Mali, I'm not sure. Malokakhovka, let's call it Little Kakhovka in English. This is where Ukrainians actually hit a Russian gathering point, and we'll watch a whole video about it. Now, if you have any idea what the Ukrainians used to hit this point, let me know in the comments. I can only assume. We can see a Russian howitzer knocked out cold, trees, leaves, everything burned, guys are walking around, and you can see this huge hole in the ground. I would say this can be a HIMARS, but it can be any self-propelled howitzer, 150 or bigger. Is this a Russian Tiger vehicle? It could be. Also knocked out cold, burned to the ground. Overall, seems like a very successful and devastating hit for the Russians. My friends, there is this Russian agent which calls himself Polkovnik Shuvalov, and he posted this report about the Russian soldiers' morale situation. The troops on the front line are tired, and there is a manpower shortages, if you can believe it. I mean, this is the same for Ukrainians. This goes to both sides. Russians and Ukrainians. Troops are tired, they're demotivated. The raining season takes the last bit of motivation they have. And they're not rotated out. Not the Ukrainian troops or the Russian troops. Neither side is rotating anymore in this war. If you are on the front lines, you will be there until something happens until the very end. Now Russians do need more troops to rotate, but Putin does not want to declare mobilization before the elections next year, because mobilization is extremely unpopular in Russia and it's the election season coming up in Russia. Believe it or not, Putin still tries to win over the people. Another part, if Putin would declare mobilization, the training of the troops would take a lot of time, and if they wouldn't train them, it would only be biomass, as we have seen before. Same goes to Ukrainians. There is an open mobilization in Ukraine. Also 17-year-olds, according to the new law, will also be drafted into the army. But this is not enough. Ukraine needs more men, but they don't have more right now in the country. A lot of the men fled abroad. Polkovnik Shuvalov reported that all these factors combined, and with the coming of the cold, the morale is right now already low. With the coming of the cold, it will even plummet further. This goes to both Ukrainians and Russians, and there will be tensions in units and in between units on both sides this winter. We will see them. Now let's talk about the Ukrainian usage of cluster munitions. Now, when the cluster munitions arrived, the entire Russian frontal manpower started digging dugouts which have roofs or fortified roofs with wood, so if the cluster munitions hit their area, they can actually go underground. Now Ukrainians of course know this, and they do hit these areas with cluster munitions exactly to drive these Russian troops all bunched together into one hole, because that's what you do if you want to survive. You gotta get off the ground, you gotta get underground and hide. But since these rooms usually all are small, there's 10-20 Russians packed in a small room, then Ukrainians already have self-propelled howitzer or HIMARS or something with very incredible precisiveness, or kamikaze drones ready. They hit an area with cluster munitions, Russians go into dugouts, Ukrainians have also already paled out the coordinates, exact coordinates of these dugouts, and boom, we have all seen footage of kamikaze drones driving straight into that dugout, maximizing the Russian losses, minimizing the usage of artillery shells. You would need 1-2 cluster munitions, 20 guys go into a hole, you guide a kamikaze drone into it, and go boom, knocked out cold. Another tactic that they use, the Ukrainians I mean, they fire an area with cluster munitions, again forcing Russians to hide. If they don't, well, they will get shrapnel in them. They do hide, and then Ukrainians suddenly very fast drive close to the Russian positions with Bradleys or BTRs, infantry fighting vehicles. Since Russians cannot shoot back, they're under cover against the cluster munitions, and Ukrainians can go very close to the areas under attack because the cluster munition shrapnel does not do much to the BTR itself. It's like a creeping barrage from World War I. Only a bit more effective since we have better communication nowadays. Now, my friends, let's talk a little bit about Russian Lancet drones, and this information comes from different frontline sources, frontline soldiers who are just saying how things are very directly. Russian Lancet drones are unfortunately very effective, and ever since Ukrainians also started using, let's call them cope cages or cages on top of their armored vehicles, Russian Lancet drones have been modified with a 2-explosion warhead. The first one to penetrate the cage, and the second one, cumulative warhead, to penetrate into the armored vehicle. Unfortunately, it works. Second of all, Lancet drones, some of them do have night vision capabilities, and some of them reportedly now have swarm capabilities. Lancet is like a huge kamikaze drone, so it needs a recon drone to scan the area and then guide the Lancet operator into the area. Now, if you swarm an area with these drones, they're big, they carry big explosions, they take out armored vehicles, then unfortunately any armor in the area, if there is not electronic warfare defense systems of Ukrainians, this armor will be knocked out cold. Electronic warfare defense systems and jammers are very expensive and very rare, so Ukrainians are concentrating them into the areas they have most troops in. So other areas in between these important fronts are not covered, so Lancets wreak havoc there. My friends, this was it for today, but don't go yet because we have patrons. I want to butcher these 5 guys with my Estonian pronunciation. We have Dash, that's just Dash, creeps in Estonian. Yeah, thank you, anonymous guy. We have Graham Tchom, Christian Klaborne, Stephan Gladiadis. You gotta be Lithuanian, your family name sounds very Lithuanian. And finally we have Setk Kerry. If you like my channel, my friends, the Patreon link is in the description below. Also, I guide you to go and follow me on Instagram because I've post photos about my adventures there that I cannot share on YouTube. I'll see you there. And until my next update, which will be tomorrow, Slava Ukraini and bye bye.